Welcome to the new horror story. I never believed in bad omens, not until that night. It's been over 20 years now, but I still remember every detail like it happened last week. Back then, I was in my mid-20s, broke most of the time, living in a cramped rental flat in a dull little neighborhood called Brookside Heights. You wouldn't find it on a regular map unless you squinted at the outskirts of the city. A cluster of old apartment buildings, most of them built in the late 70s, decaying from neglect and carrying the kind of stories no one liked to talk about. My name's Aidan Clark, and this is what happened. I'd been working at a tire shop during the day. Nothing glamorous, just enough to cover my rent, the occasional pizza, and a couple of beers on the weekends. Most of my friends from school had either left town or gotten stuck in dead-end jobs like mine. One of the few I still hung out with was a guy named Tom Mercer. Tom was older by a year, but you wouldn't have known it. He had a baby face and a kind of restless energy, the sort of guy who could never sit still for more than a few minutes. That summer, Tom moved into an old apartment complex on Grayson Street, a hulking gray concrete slab of a building called Harlow View. 7 floors, no central air, and an elevator that worked about as often as a coin toss. His unit was somewhere on the 7th floor, 701 or 707. I honestly can't remember anymore. It was one of those numbers you don't want to remember. I'd been over a few times before. The place had a weird vibe, the kind you can't explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. The hallways were narrow, dimly lit, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of damp carpet and old smoke. You could always hear a television or someone arguing through paper-thin walls. It's a dump, but it's cheap, Tom had told me when he first moved in. And you can see the street from my window. Not much of a selling point, but we were young and didn't care. That night was a Saturday, I remember, because I'd worked a half shift that morning, and by evening I was already planning to get drunk and forget the whole week. Tom called around 6:30 p.m. "Hey, man," he said, his voice crackling over the landline. "Got no plans tonight. You down for a few drinks?" "Sure," I said. "You at your place?" "Yeah, bring some beer if you can." So I grabbed a 6-pack of some cheap brand I don't even remember now and walked over. The sun was still out, but barely. The way it lit up the cracked pavement and dirty windows made the whole place look washed out and kind of sad. Tom's apartment was on the far end of the 7th floor, facing the parking lot. From his window, you could see the line of street lights that ran along Grayson Street. I got there around 7:15 p.m., and a couple of our other friends, Marcus and Eddie, showed up not long after. We weren't a wild crowd, just 4 guys in their 20s sitting on the floor drinking cheap wine and beer, and talking about our jobs, our exes, and whatever else came to mind. Tom didn't have much furniture, a battered couch, a small TV, a coffee table with one leg propped up by a phone book. We sprawled out on the worn carpet, the TV turned off, the windows open to let in the thick summer air. By the time it got dark, we were halfway through 2 bottles of wine and more than a little buzzed. "Man, this place gets creepy at night," Marcus said, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. "Yeah," Eddie chimed in, "those hallways freak me out. Feels like somebody's always watching you." Tom snorted. "Bunch of wimps. It's just old place has character." "Character my ass," I muttered, making them laugh. At some point, someone turned the lights off. I don't remember who. The room was lit only by the glow of a street light outside, its orange light cutting a soft square on the ceiling. We lay there, still talking, voices low and lazy. That's when it happened. At first, I thought the light flickered, but it didn't. It just went dark like someone had passed in front of the window. It was quick. A sudden cut of blackness across the ceiling, and then it came back. Did you see that? Marcus asked, sitting up. Yeah, Eddie whispered. The light. We all turned toward the window. The street light was still there, shining like before, but something was off. I felt it before I saw it. A prickling at the back of my neck, the unmistakable sense of being watched, and then we saw him. A figure, a man, I guess, was clinging to the steel bars outside the window. Harlow View didn't have balconies, just a few thin security bars welded across some of the windows. He was hanging there, silhouetted against the street light, his face hidden in shadow, but then he grinned, a wide, unnatural smile with teeth that caught the light. No sound, no movement, just him grinning. What the hell? Tom started, but his voice caught. The figure raised one arm slowly and made a strange twisting motion with his hand, like a wave or a crooked beckoning. I felt my stomach drop. Eddie scrambled back, hitting the table. Who is that? Marcus shouted, grabbing an empty bottle. For a second, no one moved. It was like we were frozen, each of us trying to make sense of what we were seeing. Then Tom lunged forward with a shout, hurling a bottle toward the window. The bottle shattered against the bars, and the man was gone. We didn't hear him leave. No sound of footsteps, no scrambling, nothing. We rushed to the window, pressing against the glass, trying to look down to see where he might have gone. But the ground 7 floors below was empty. No one on the sidewalk, no movement, nothing. No way he climbed down that fast. I said, my voice shaky. Marcus swore under his breath. Maybe he's in the hallway. Eddie said. We grabbed a couple of empty bottles because in our drunk, terrified state, that was the only weapon we had, and crept toward the apartment door. The hallway was empty, dim, quiet. The flickering overhead light near the elevator still doing its slow blink. But then we heard it, stomping footsteps, heavy, quick, descending the stairwell. He's going down, Tom whispered. We followed, sticking close together, each of us straining to listen. The footsteps were always just ahead. Too fast to catch, but never too far. Down to the 6th, the 5th, the 4th, and then nothing. Complete silence. We waited, listening. Eddie leaned over the railing. I don't see anybody, he said. None of us wanted to go further. Whatever bravery we'd scraped together was draining fast. Let's go back, Tom muttered, and we did. But when we got back to the apartment, and this is the part I'll never forget, Marcus pointed something out. Guys, how the hell did he even get to the window? We all stared. From the stairwell to Tom's window was a straight hallway, maybe 60 ft. No balconies, no ledges, no easy way to climb around the side of the building. And those steel bars, they were rusted tight. Barely enough space for a hand, let alone a person to cling to. We checked the ground outside. No one, no body, no sign anyone had fallen or jumped. Nothing. I never went back to Harlow View after that night. Neither did Marcus or Eddie. Tom stayed for a few more months before moving out. He said he kept hearing things in the hallway at night. Footsteps that stopped outside his door. A knock at the window 7 floors up. I don't know what it was we saw that night. I don't want to. But to this day, sometimes when I'm alone at night, I get that same feeling. The prickling at the back of my neck, the sense of being watched, and I remember his grin. I never really cared much for where I lived as long as the rent was cheap and the neighbors kept to themselves. That's how I ended up at Rosewood Court Apartments, a faded 4-story brick building tucked behind a liquor store and an auto repair shop on the far end of Caro Street. It wasn't the best part of Eastbridge, but it had a certain worn-out charm. peeling paint, creaky stairwells, and ancient radiators that hissed in the winter like they were alive. I'd been living there for just over a year in a modest bedroom on the second floor. Nothing fancy. Beige walls, a tiny kitchen, a single window that looked out onto the street, but it was mine. And after a string of bad breakups and worse jobs, that meant something. The landlord was a woman named Elena Reed, pushing 70, small, wiry, with sharp features and a no-nonsense attitude. She lived in Unit 101, right by the front entrance, and ran the place herself. You'd see her on the stoop, some mornings chain smoking and feeding stray cats. Grumpy as she was, Eleanor had a soft spot for those animals. Never missed a chance to tell me about how she'd nursed a kitten back from the brink, or chased off a kid throwing rocks at the alley strays. We weren't friends, not exactly, but she always greeted me by name. And on the first of every month, like clockwork, I'd knock on her door and hand her my rent in cash. She didn't believe in online payments. No computers in my goddamn house, she'd grumble. It was old school but reliable. That's what made it so strange when one month it wasn't Eleanor who answered the door. It was a man, mid-30s, maybe a year or two older than me. Broad shoulders, dark hair, dressed casual in a plain gray hoodie and jeans. His eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, caught mine immediately. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice flat. I hesitated, thrown by the unfamiliar face. "I'm looking for Eleanor. I live in 204, here to drop off my rent." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She's out of town for a bit. I'm her nephew, Daniel. She asked me to handle things while she's away." Eleanor never once mentioned a nephew. In fact, she'd told me more than once how her family didn't bother with her, that she outlived the lot of them. But I didn't say that. Instead, I handed over the envelope. "All right, just let her know I paid on time." "Yeah, of course," he said smoothly. "Pleasure to meet you." I gave a nod and started to turn away, but curiosity got the better of me. I glanced past him into the apartment. It was dim inside, shades drawn. I could make out a cluttered coffee table, stacks of yellowed newspapers, a floor lamp tilted at an odd angle. No sign of Eleanor. Before I could see more, Daniel shifted his weight, blocking my view. "She'll be back soon," he said, tone a little too firm. Then, like an afterthought, "Enjoy your day." I mumbled a goodbye and walked off, unsettled in a way I couldn't quite explain. That night, as I sat on my couch eating cold leftover pizza, I couldn't shake the weirdness of the encounter. Eleanor never left town, not even for a weekend. The old woman barely left her stoop. She'd told me once she hated travel. "Ain't nothing out there I haven't seen already, and half of it's worse now," she'd scoffed. So why now? I told myself I was overthinking it. People leave sometimes. Things change. But the next odd thing happened 3 days later. I was cleaning up my tiny bedroom when I noticed the window screen was loose. Not just a little bent, but half dislodged from the frame, like someone had pushed it in from outside. The window faced the street, second floor, about 15 ft up. There had been no storms, no strong winds, and I rarely opened it. I leaned out to get a better look and felt a sudden jolt of unease. Standing down on the sidewalk just by the street light was Daniel, just standing there staring up at my window, hands stuffed into the pockets of that same gray hoodie. No phone, no cigarette, just watching. When our eyes met, he didn't flinch, didn't look away. His lips twitched into that same thin smile. A chill ran down my spine. I yanked the window shut and drew the blinds. The next morning, I stopped by the front office, if you could call it that. Really, just a corner of Eleanor's living room with a battered filing cabinet and an old rotary phone. It was locked up tight. No answer when I knocked. The place looked the same as it had when Daniel opened the door, dim, stuffy, cluttered. The unease started to build. That evening around 7, there was a knock at my door. I checked the peephole. "Daniel, hey, just checking in," he said when I opened it a crack. "Noticed your window screen looked busted. I can fix it for you if you want." I hesitated. The landlord's job technically, but if he was really family. "Yeah, all right," I said. "I don't have the tools for it." He smiled. "Won't take long." I let him in. He carried a small toolbox, worked quietly by the window while I pretended to browse something on my phone. Every so often, I caught him glancing around my apartment like he was taking inventory. His gaze lingered on my laptop, propped on the coffee table. After a few minutes, he stood. "There you go," he said. "Good as new, thanks. Mind if I use your bathroom before I head out?" I didn't want to say yes. Every nerve in my body screamed against it. But what was I going to do? Accuse the guy of what exactly? "It's down the hall," I said stiffly. He was in there maybe a minute. Then he left, polite as ever. Later that night, I noticed my laptop was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd left it somewhere stupid. The kitchen counter, the bedroom under a pillow. I tore the place apart, getting angrier with each passing second. It wasn't until I sat down to retrace the evening that it clicked. "Daniel, I knew it like you know when it's about to rain in your bones. But what could I do? Call the cops and tell them my landlord's nif, you maybe stole my laptop? No proof, no witnesses, unless I went down there and found it. Eleanor's apartment wasn't secure. She never locked the side window by the alley. Said the cats liked to come and go. I'd helped her with groceries enough times to know the lay out by heart. It was a reckless, desperate idea, but I was angry and something deeper than anger, annoying, curdling dread. So I waited until the building was dark and quiet, slipped on a hoodie, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way down the side alley. The window opened easily. Inside, the place was worse than I remembered. Stale air, the sour stink of rotting food, half a dozen cats nowhere in sight. The coffee table was piled high with unopened mail. I crept through the living room toward the bedroom. The smell hit me before I reached the door. A thick, cloying rot. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve. I told myself I was imagining it. Told myself I'd grab my laptop and get out. But something made me keep going. The bedroom door was half open, and inside, sprawled across the carpet in a state of grotesque decay, was Eleanor. Her skin gone a waxy gray-green, flies thick in the air. The cats must have stopped feeding days ago. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. Then a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around. Daniel stood in the hallway, face unreadable in the dim light. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said softly. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through my chest. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Daniel took a step forward. "I didn't want it to go this way," he murmured, his voice almost regretful. "But you couldn't leave it alone, could you?" I backed up, my heel knocking against a side table. The flashlight slipped from my grip and clattered to the floor, the beam jerking wildly across the room before settling on Eleanor's lifeless face. It was all happening too fast, my brain struggling to catch up, my options shrank by the second. Daniel moved closer. "Look," I forced out, my voice thin and unsteady. "Take whatever you want. I don't care about the laptop or the rent or any of this." He gave a humorless little laugh. "It's not about that anymore. There was no weapon within reach, no one coming, no neighbors to call out to, not in this building, not at this hour. Everyone here minded their own business too well, but the window, I bolted for it. I don't think he expected me to run, not then. I hurtled over the coffee table, scattering old newspapers and cat dishes, and dove through the open window into the alley outside, scraped my arms on the way down, but hit the pavement in a half roll, my breath knocked out of me. Behind me, I heard a crash. Daniel shouting something I didn't catch. I didn't wait. I ran out of the alley down Carroll Street, past the liquor store with its flickering sign. I didn't stop until I reached the corner gas station where the overnight clerk sat half asleep behind the counter. I burst through the door, panting, blood running down my forearm. "Call the cops," I gasped. "Call them now." The guy stared at me like I was insane, but he grabbed the phone. When the police arrived, I told them everything, or as much as I could manage between ragged breaths, about Elena, about Daniel, about what I'd found in that apartment. At first, they treated me like some panicked junkie, wouldn't let me leave, asked the same questions again and again. But when they finally went to check the apartment, when they saw what was in that bedroom, everything changed. They found Eleanor's body, and they found Daniel too, or rather, they found a man named Carter Voss, a drifter, a career grifter with warrants in 3 states, no relation to Elena. He'd been squatting in her apartment for over a week. She'd probably confronted him and paid the price. The medical examiner said she'd been dead for at least 9 days. He'd been collecting rent, pretending to be family, watching the building, watching me, and no one noticed. No one cared. The cops asked if I wanted to stay somewhere else that night. I didn't even go back for my things. I left Rosewood Court Apartments behind, moved to the other side of Eastbridge, picked up shifts at a grocery store, and tried to forget. But some nights when it's quiet, I'll wake up thinking there's someone standing by my window, and I'll remember that pale blue stare fixed on me in the dark. I never really cared much for apartment living. When I was a kid, my family bounced between rentals more times than I could count. 2-bedroom units with paper-thin walls, neighbors who fought at all hours, and landlords who pretended they didn't hear your complaints. I told myself when I got older, I'd save enough for a small house somewhere quiet, maybe a little patch of yard for my daughter to run around in. Life, though, had other plans. By the time I was 33, I was separated from my wife, barely scraping by on a warehouse supervisor's paycheck, and living in a tired 5-story apartment building called Marlow Heights on the west side of Ashwick. The building wasn't exactly what you'd call modern. Built in the early 70s with fading brickwork and a rusty old freight elevator that rattled like a dying animal when you used it. But it was cheap and, most importantly, month to month. No lease. Trap me if things got worse. My daughter, Lena, was 6 at the time. She stayed with me every other weekend, and I tried my best to make the place feel like home for her. I put up her drawings on the fridge, got a pink beanbag chair for the living room, and kept a small shelf of her favorite story books next to my bed. It wasn't much, but it was ours. The neighbors were mostly quiet. An old man named Frank in 2A, who always wore the same faded baseball cap. A middle-aged woman named Carla in 5C, who chain smoked on the balcony, and a younger guy named Illy, who worked nights at a bar. We'd nudge to each other in the hallway, exchange the occasional small talk, but nobody got too friendly. That was fine by me. It was a Tuesday night in early September when the trouble started. I'd gotten home late from a double shift, my back aching and my head pounding. Lena had stayed with her mom that week, so the apartment was dead quiet. I grabbed a leftover slice of pizza from the fridge and flipped on the TV. Some late-night crime show was playing, but I wasn't really paying attention. That's when I heard it. A slow, steady knock on my front door. Knock, knock, knock. I glanced at the clock. 11:48 p.m. Nobody knocked on your door at Marlow Heights that late unless something was wrong. My first thought was Frank. He'd had some health problems. Maybe he needed help. I got up, crossed the living room, and peeked through the peephole. But it wasn't Frank. It was a man I'd never seen before. Tall, maybe late 40s, dressed in a dark coat and a pale blue baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was standing perfectly still, staring straight at my door. Something about the way he held himself, stiff, almost unnatural, made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I hesitated for a second, then called out, "Yeah." No answer. "Can I help you, man?" Still nothing. He didn't move, didn't even blink. I was about to say something else when, as suddenly as he appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall toward the stairwell. I stood there for a while, listening. The building was quiet again. No footsteps, no doors opening. Just the faint hum of the old refrigerator behind me. I chalked it up to a drunk, maybe someone who got the wrong apartment, but something about it didn't sit right. The next morning on my way to work, I stopped by Frank's door, gave it a couple of knocks, nothing. I was about to leave when I heard a shuffle from inside. "Frank, you good in there, buddy?" There was a pause, then his voice raspy and weak. Yeah, I'm fine. Don't open your door at night, kid." That was all he said. Didn't answer when I asked what he meant. I could hear the lock click shut from his side, weird as hell. I left for work feeling uneasy. The warehouse was short-staffed and swamped with inventory, so I didn't have time to dwell on it. But when I got home that evening, I noticed something new. A faint chalk mark on my door. A tiny crude X drawn at about chest height. At first, I thought it was a smudge, but when I touched it, the white dust came off on my fingertips. I looked up and down the hallway. None of the other doors had it, just mine. I grabbed an old rag and wiped it clean, then spent the evening with the TV on a little louder than usual. Around midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. On my way back to bed, I passed the living room window and caught a glimpse of movement in the parking lot below. The man in the blue cap, standing by the lamp post, looking up at my window. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my phone, snapped a picture through the glass, though it came out too dark, blurry to be useful, and called the building's night manager. Ronnie was a slacker in his early 20s who mostly played video games in the basement office, but to his credit, he was up there within a few minutes. By the time he arrived, the man was gone. We checked the lobby cameras. There were 3, old as hell, but working. The footage showed the man walking through the lobby around 11:45 p.m. the night before, heading to the stairwell. No record of him leaving. No record of him returning. I asked Ronnie if he recognized the guy. He didn't. Said as far as he knew, nobody had moved in or out of the building in the last 2 months. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day at work, I told my buddy Mason about it. He laughed it off, probably some cracked-out tweaker. Ashwick's full of him, but I knew better. The man wasn't high. He wasn't drunk. He was something else. When I got home that evening, a note had been slipped under my door. 3 simple words, "I see you," no signature, no explanation. I sat there staring at it, my pulse hammering in my ears. I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox, deadbolted the door, and slept with the lights on. The next weekend was Lena's. I almost called my ex to cancel, but I didn't want to scare her or let this freak win. I spent Saturday cleaning the place, making it look like nothing was wrong. When Lena arrived, she ran in, hugged me, and immediately asked if we could watch Monsters, Inc. again. I forced a smile. "Sure, kiddo." We made popcorn, curled up on the couch, and for a little while it felt normal until later that night. I went to the bathroom while she was asleep, and when I came back out, every light in the apartment was off. The TV was still on, but the picture was pure static. And on the screen, for a split second, I swear I saw the man's face just staring. I lunged for the remote, turned it off, and ran to check on Lena. She was fine, still asleep, clutching her stuffed bunny, but on the wall beside her bed, another chalk axe. I didn't sleep after that. I remember the night I moved into Elmbridge Flats more vividly than any other night in my life. It wasn't a remarkable building by any means. A faded four-story brick rectangle from the 1970s stuck between a shuttered laundromat and a corner store that always smelled like overripe fruit and cheap incense. I didn't have much to my name back then. A worn-out mattress, a desk with a busted drawer, a couple of boxes filled with clothes, and a beat-up lamp my mother insisted I take with me. At 28, I was freshly out of a breakup and clinging to the edges of a paycheck from a dead-end IT help desk job. The apartment was cheap, and that was enough for me. The ad in the paper had said, "Quiet building, utilities included, no pets." No mention of how the hallway lights flickered or how the walls seemed to hum at night like the whole place had a heartbeat. I signed the lease without a second thought. A man named Mr. Fletcher managed the building, mid-50s with a comb-over and a voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. He barely made eye contact as I filled out the paperwork. "Nobody else on your floor right now," he said, tapping his pen on the lease. "Quiet. You'll like it. I figured it was a sales pitch." Turns out it wasn't. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked just enough to clear a path to the fridge and set up my mattress in the bedroom. The place smelled like old plaster and cleaning chemicals. I cracked a window, but the air outside carried a damp metallic scent that wasn't much better. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the occasional groan of pipes and distant sirens lulling me towards sleep. Then came the knock. It was sharp and deliberate. 3 crisp raps against the door. I sat up, pulse quickening. A glance at my phone told me it was 11:18 p.m. Who the hell's knocking at this hour? I swung my legs off the bed and tiptoed to the door. The peephole showed nothing but the dimly lit empty hallway. I waited a full minute before turning the deadbolt and cracking the door open. The hallway was deserted. No signs of life, no sounds of retreating footsteps. I told myself it was probably some drunk who got the wrong door and went back to bed. But it happened again the next night, and the one after that, always between 10:30 and midnight, always 3 sharp knocks. I started leaving the chain on the door and peering through the peephole the moment I heard it. Still, every time nobody there. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe it was pipes, the building settling, an echo from another floor. But deep down, I knew the knocks were real. They felt purposeful. On the 4th night, something changed. I was half dozing, the TV casting flickering shadows on the walls when the knock came, but not at the front door. This time it came from the wall beside my bed. I bolted upright, my heart pounding in my throat. 3 loud, unmistakable knocks. The wall on that side connected to the apartment next door. Unit 3B. I hadn't met whoever lived there. When I moved in, Fletcher had told me the unit was vacant, but maybe someone moved in since then. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I knocked back once, a tentative, hesitant tap. Silence. I stayed awake until dawn, the tension in my chest refusing to let me drift off. The next morning, as I left for work, I glanced at the door to 3B. It was ajar, just slightly enough to see darkness inside. I hesitated, keys clutched tight in my fist. "Hey," a voice called out behind me. I jumped and turned to see a woman locking up her apartment down the hall. Mid-60s, silver hair pulled back in a loose bun. She smiled gently. "Didn't mean to startle you, hun. New here, aren't you?" I managed a weak nod. "Yeah, a few days. Name's Marlene. I'm in 3F. We chatted briefly. She was kind in the way older people sometimes are to someone clearly out of their depth. I decided to ask. You wouldn't happen to know who lives in 3B, would you? Her smile faltered. 3B, that place has been empty since last year. I felt the blood drained from my face. You sure? Positive. Young guy used to live there, moved out last fall. No one since. She lowered her voice, glancing toward the door. You see something? I hesitated. Should I tell her? Would I sound crazy? Just heard some noises. Thought maybe someone moved in. She frowned. If you're hearing things from that place, you ought to talk to Fletcher. Door shouldn't be open like that. I thanked her and left for work, but my skin prickled the entire walk to the bus stop. When I got home that evening, the door to 3B was shut. I tried to shake it off. Maybe Fletcher had come by and closed it. Maybe Marlene was wrong and someone was moving in without telling anyone. It wasn't my business. But that night, it started again. 3 sharp knocks at my door, and then again on the wall behind my bed. I reported it to the management the next morning. Fletcher wasn't in, but the assistant manager, a guy named Chris, jotted down my complaint. We'll check it out, he said, disinterested, not looking up from his phone. I didn't expect much. That night was the worst. I woke at 2:14 a.m., the exact time because I glanced at the glowing digits on my alarm clock to a steady rhythmic pounding, not knocks this time. It was like something was slamming against the wall again and again. I grabbed the baseball that I kept by my bed, a leftover from Little League years ago, and crept toward the wall. The pounding stopped. My apartment was deathly silent. No TV noise, no humming fridge. Even the distant traffic sounded muffled. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing, and then a whisper, faint, breathy, as if someone were speaking through a mouth pressed to the plaster. Let me in. I recoiled, my stomach lurching. I called the building office, but no one answered. I wasn't about to wait around for morning. I packed a duffel bag and drove to my buddy Kevin's place across town, crashing on his couch for the rest of the night. When I returned the next day, I found a notice on my door. Maintenance entered Unit 3B for inspection. Issue resolved. I demanded answers. Chris, now paying a little more attention, told me that when Fletcher went to check 3B that morning, the door was unlocked. The place was empty, but the carpet was torn up near the bedroom wall, like someone had tried to claw through it. They checked the building's security cameras between 1000 p.m. and 2:00 a.m. Over the past week, a figure, small, pale, moving oddly, had been seen slipping in and out of the apartment. No one recognized them. The footage was grainy, the face indistinct. Cops came. Chris told me did a sweep. Nothing now. They never told me who it was or what. I didn't renew my lease. I left Elmidge Flats 3 weeks later, never once sleeping another night there. Marlene moved out shortly after me. I heard the building was condemned last year after a string of break-ins and a small fire in one of the vacant units. I still have that bat by my bed. And every so often in the dead of night, when the house is silent and the air feels too still, I swear I hear 3 sharp knocks against my bedroom wall, and I never ever open the door. I never cared much for cities. It wasn't some kind of snobby small-town loyalty or anything like that. I just spent most of my life in places where you could leave your door unlocked and nobody would test it, where every neighbor knew your name, and you couldn't get away with anything because someone's aunt or uncle was bound to find out. So, when I moved to Ashfield Apartments, a 6-story building just off Brook Avenue, it wasn't exactly by choice. I was 26 at the time, in between jobs, and had just gotten out of a long, messy relationship. My cousin Noah, who lived about an hour away in Milford, helped me move in. The apartment itself wasn't terrible. Small, sure, with yellowed walls and carpet that crunched in a few places, but the rent was dirt cheap, utilities included. Landlord was a gruff, no-nonsense woman named Janet, who handed me the keys with a cigarette hanging from her lip and no eye contact. "Don't leave your trash out overnight," she'd grumbled, already walking back to her unit on the ground floor. "And if you hear anything weird, mind your own." That last part stuck with me. I settled into the apartment over the next week. Got my little TV set up in the corner of the living room. Found a cheap futon off Marketplace. Stocked the fridge with frozen meals and off-brand soda. I didn't know any of the neighbors, though I saw a few coming and going. Most kept to themselves. The only person I spoke to was an older guy named Rick, who lived 2 doors down and smoked like a chimney out on the fire escape. "Place is quiet," he told me the second time we crossed paths. "Most of the weirdos moved out years ago." I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be reassuring. The apartment building sat wedged between a dry cleaner and a boarded-up video store. Across the street was an old laundromat and a tiny pizza shop that barely stayed open past 10:00. It wasn't the worst area in town, but it had that look, the kind of place where people kept their curtains drawn, even in daylight. My first real scare came a few nights after moving in. It was a Friday night, maybe around 11:30. I'd been sitting on the futon with the lights off, playing some old survival horror game on my PS2. The apartment was quiet, save for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional pipe creaking somewhere in the walls. Outside, I could hear a few distant cars and the faint buzz of a streetlight that flickered every so often. I was just about to turn the game off when I heard it. A knock, not a loud, aggressive pounding, just a single firm knock at the front door. I paused the game and stared at the door. I hadn't ordered anything, wasn't expecting anyone, and nobody in this building knew me. It wasn't like my old place where you might get a neighbor asking to borrow a cup of sugar at 9:00 p.m. Another knock, this one a little louder. I grabbed the remote and muted the TV. The knock came again, then another one quicker this time. 3 sharp raps. For some reason, my stomach dropped. I don't know why I didn't just call out or look through the peephole. I just sat there, heart thudding in my chest, watching the door. It felt like the air in the room had thickened somehow, like the temperature dropped a few degrees. After maybe a minute of silence, I finally stood up. I crept over to the door, careful not to let the floorboard squeak. I pressed my eye to the peephole and felt my skin prickle. There were 2 men standing on the landing, both wearing dark hooded sweatshirts, one with his hood pulled up. The other's face was partially in shadow, but from what I could see, he had a thin, patchy beard and sunken eyes. They weren't moving, just standing there facing the door. I felt a jolt of panic. I reached for the chain lock and made sure it was secure. I didn't know what to do. My phone was charging in the bedroom, but something told me not to turn away. One of the men raised his hand and knocked again, slow and deliberate. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I heard it, a soft voice muffled by the door. "Hey, open up, man, just want to talk." The voice was calm, almost casual, but there was something about it that set every nerve in my body on edge. Of forced friendliness, like a predator talking to a trapped animal. I didn't respond. The other guy leaned in, his face inches from the peephole now. "Come on, man. We know you're in there. Lights on." My blood turned cold. I hadn't realized the hallway light switch was just inside the door, and a faint glow probably bled out from around the frame. I backed away. They knocked again, harder this time. Opened the door. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, my hands slick with sweat. I wasn't a fighter. I didn't even know what I planned to do with it. Then I had a stupid, reckless idea. Without thinking, I reached over and flicked the switch for the outside hallway light. A dim bulb above the landing snapped on with a faint buzz. The reaction was instant. Both men turned, shielding their faces from the sudden light, and stepped back. One of them muttered something I couldn't catch. Then, as quickly as they'd come, they turned and hurried down the hall toward the stairwell. I moved back to the peephole, watching as they vanished around the corner. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally retrieved my phone from the bedroom, I debated calling the police. But what would I even say? 2 guys knocked on my door and then left. No crime there. No proof either. The next morning, I told Janet about it. She barely raised an eyebrow. "Probably just junkies," she muttered, lighting a cigarette on the fire escape. "They hang around sometimes. You leave your window unlocked." I shook my head. "Good. Don't." That was the extent of her concern. Over the next week, things got weirder. I started noticing little things. A cigarette butt wedged in the door frame. Fresh scuff marks on the hallway floor like someone had been pacing. One night, I found the hallway fire extinguisher halfway down the stairs as if someone had grabbed it and then changed their mind. I kept to myself, barely left the apartment after dark. But a few nights later, it happened again. Same knock, same time. This time, 3 men, same dark clothes, same motionless stance. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat in the dark, watching from the peephole as they stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, then silently turned and left. After that, I started sleeping with the knife under my pillow, and still, to this day, I don't know what they wanted. I never thought I'd end up back in East Harbor. It wasn't the kind of place people left and came back to. A small coastal city in Maine, the kind of town where summers smelled like salt water and winters froze the ocean spray on your car windows. People either stayed forever or left for good. I'd left when I was 20 to finish college in Boston, hoping I wouldn't have to look back. But 5 years later, a busted relationship, student loans, and a job layoff landed me right back where I swore I wouldn't be. My mother still lived here in the same pale blue house on Wickham Street. I loved her, but moving back into your childhood bedroom with posters still tacked to the wall at 25 felt like a failure I wasn't ready to accept. So, after 2 months of job hunting and side gigs fixing up boats at the marina, I managed to find a 2-bedroom apartment on Marlowe Avenue, a weathered two-story building with an attached laundromat and a faded sign that just said The Willows. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, cheap, and available. The landlord, a gruff old guy named Vern, seemed to care less about background checks and more about rent paid on time. He gave me a choice. A small one, bedroom upstairs with windows that face the alley, or a 2-bedroom downstairs for just $50 more. I went for the 2-bedroom, figuring maybe I could get a roommate down the line and ease the cost. Turns out I didn't have to wait long. A week after I moved in, I ran into an old friend from high school at the diner down the street, Ben Thatcher. We hadn't been close in school, but we'd played on the same JV baseball team and shared a few classes. He'd stuck around East Harbor after graduation, working at his uncle's hardware store. Over burnt coffee and rubbery scrambled eggs, he mentioned he'd just broken up with his girlfriend and needed a place to stay. "It's not much," I warned him, stirring my coffee, "but it's got 2 bedrooms and the hot water works." Ben grinned. "Man, after crashing on my sister's couch for 3 weeks, you could offer me a closet and I'd be grateful." So, just like that, we were roommates. It wasn't a bad place, really. The living room had this weird floral wallpaper that was probably older than both of us, but it felt homey in a way. My bedroom was at the end of a short hallway with its own tiny bathroom attached, a perk I never had in Boston. Ben took the room across from mine. The kitchen was cramped with cabinets painted a sickly shade of pale yellow and an ancient gas stove that made this soft click-click whoosh sound whenever you lit a burner. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just a stopgap until I found steady work and saved up enough to leave town again. The first few weeks. At first, it was uneventful. I picked up a job delivering packages for a courier company out of Bangor, which meant long drives and odd hours. Ben worked mostly days, so we barely crossed paths except in the evenings. We'd sit on the old couch with beers watching whatever garbage reality show was on. The place had its quirks. The floorboards creaked in weird spots, and the overhead light in the hallway would flicker sometimes. The landlord swore it wasn't faulty wiring, just old bones settling. Typical East Harbor nonsense. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't uneasy sometimes, though. Not because of any ghost stories or local legends, just a feeling like the apartment had been waiting for something. I kept waking up at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, no reason for it. No sound, no nightmare, just eyes snapping open in the dark. It was a Thursday. I remember because it was my day off, and I'd been home most of the day cleaning. Ben was supposed to be working till 7:00. Around 4:00, I heard the front door open while I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter. "Yo, that you?" I called out. No answer. I figured maybe Ben forgot his keys again or came home early. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and stepped into the hallway. No one was there. The door was shut, locked, deadbolt still engaged. I frowned. Maybe I imagined it. Old building noises. Maybe one of the neighbors. I turned to go back into the kitchen, and that's when I heard it. The soft click of a door handle. My bedroom door. It was a weird sound. Familiar, sure. I knew what my bedroom door sounded like when you tried the knob, but it didn't make sense. The only people with keys were me and Ben. And if he wasn't home, I walked toward the hallway, calling out again. "Ben, if you're screwing with me, knock it off." Nothing. I reached my bedroom. The door was closed. Locked because I had this old habit of locking it whenever I wasn't in there. A leftover from living in sketchy places in college. I stood there for a second, listening. Silence. I unlocked the door slowly, pushing it open. Empty. The bathroom door inside was open, too. The whole room smelled faintly of soap from when I'd cleaned earlier. I checked the closet under the bed. Nothing. No one. I even checked the window. It was shut, latch still in place. I stood there for a while, feeling that cold, prickly sensation crawl up my arms, like my body realized something before my brain could name it. I told myself it was nothing. Probably the apartment settling. Maybe I'd heard a neighbor's door, but it didn't feel like nothing. The text about 10 minutes later, I texted Ben. "Hey, you coming home early?" His reply came fast. "Nope, still at work." Why? I stared at the screen, stomach dropping a little. "Thought I heard you come in." "Nah, man, still here till 7:00. I didn't tell him what else I'd heard, didn't want to sound crazy. Then around 4:30 I heard the front door open and close again, same unmistakable creak. I bolted out of my room this time. Nothing, no one, but the door, it was unlocked. I locked it right away, hands slightly shaking, and called Ben. "Dude, swear to God, someone's screwing with us." I told him, "What are you talking about?" I explained everything. The noises, the door handle, the door unlocking. "You're sure you locked it before?" "I don't leave it open. You know that." He promised to leave work early. Said he'd be home in 15. When Ben got back, we searched the whole place. Every closet, every cabinet, under every piece of furniture. The windows were still latched. The back door, which opened into a small fenced yard, was bolted shut from the inside. Nothing was taken. No sign of forced entry, but I wasn't crazy. I know what I heard. We ended up installing a cheap chain lock on the front door that night. From then on, neither of us forgot to lock it. Nothing else ever happened after that. A few weeks later, we were having a drink at the dockside, this dive bar near the wharf. An older guy sitting next to us at the bar struck up a conversation, asked where we were living now. When we told him, his expression changed. The Willows, ground floor apartment. Yeah, I said cautiously. He took a long sip of his beer. A guy who lived in that place about 10 years back. Name was Aaron Keller, went missing one night, left the door unlocked, never found him. I didn't sleep much after that, and I still don't leave that door unlocked. I never thought much about where I lived as long as it was quiet, affordable. It didn't come with a laundry list of problems. That's how I ended up renting a small one-bedroom apartment at a place called Brookpine Heights on the outskirts of Dover Hill, a modest town about 40 miles from where I grew up. I just turned 28 when I moved in after a bad breakup and an even worse stretch of couch surfing with friends. The place wasn't much. An old three-story brick building with faded green shutters and creaky wooden floors, but it was mine. I didn't have much furniture aside from a bed, a second-hand couch, and a coffee table I picked up from a thrift shop a few streets over. Apartment was on the second floor, Unit 2C. It faced the narrow parking lot and an overgrown line of hedges that separated the property from the street. From my bedroom window, I could see a convenience store across the road and an old payphone no one ever used. The kind of place people forgot about, but I didn't mind. After everything I'd been through the last year, obscurity felt like a blessing. I settled in quick. Got a job at a small parts factory in town, pulling the night shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and the people mostly kept to themselves. That was what I needed. No drama, no history. The building itself was quiet, a little too quiet sometimes. There were maybe 10 apartments in total. I met a woman named Clara from 1A one afternoon while checking the mail. She was friendly in a tired, vaguely disinterested way, probably in her mid-50s, and seemed content to complain about the landlord while chain-smoking generic cigarettes. There was also a guy named Evan from 2A, a rail-thin man in his 30s, who worked nights like me. We occasionally crossed paths in the stairwell or at the vending machine on the first floor, but other than that, no one really talked much. Doors stayed shut, blinds pulled tight. It was the kind of place where you minded your business and didn't ask questions. At least that's how it was until the man in 3B moved in. It was about 6 weeks after I'd settled in. I remember because it was a Sunday afternoon and I was off work. I'd gone out for groceries and was carrying 2 bags up the narrow staircase when I saw him. He was standing at the top landing just outside 3B. Tall, pale, late 40s maybe. He was wearing an old army green jacket even though it was pushing 80 degrees out, and he was staring down at me with this expressionless look like he wasn't really seeing me at all. I gave him a quick nod. Hey, nothing. Not a flicker of acknowledgement. I kept walking, feeling the back of my neck prickle as I passed. His door was propped open a few inches behind him, and I could see the inside was almost completely dark. No furniture that I could make out, just shadows. By the time I reached my apartment, I could still feel his eyes on me. I shut the door, set down the groceries, and told myself to forget about it. People are weird, especially in places like this. That night, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock, not at my door, at my window. I bolted upright, heart slamming against my ribs. I live on the second floor. There's no balcony, no fire escape, just a narrow ledge no one in their right mind would be standing on. I stayed frozen for what felt Like an eternity, staring at the half-open blinds, another knock. 3 slow taps against the glass. I finally managed to move. Grabbing my phone from the nightstand, I flicked on the flashlight and shone it toward the window. Nothing. No one there. No marks on the glass. No lingering shadow. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I went to the building manager, Mr. Lewin, a heavy-set guy with a wandering eye and a distinct smell of menthols. "Hey, anyone living in 3B?" I asked. He furrowed his brow, squinting as though trying to remember. "Yeah, some guy moved in last week. Name's Ronald Blair or something. Why?" I hesitated, just he was acting weird yesterday, staring. "I think he might have tried getting to my window last night." Lewin snorted up on the second floor. "Guy must be Spider." "Man," he shook his head, "I'll have a word, don't worry about it." But I did worry about it. That night I kept the blind shut tight, left the hallway light on. I even slid a kitchen chair under the door handle like some half-assed security system. And still, at exactly 2:13 a.m., there came another knock at my window. This time I didn't freeze. I jumped out of bed and yanked the blinds open in one motion. The glass was empty, but down in the parking lot near the hedges I saw him. Ronald Blair, standing perfectly still, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, staring up at my window. He didn't move, didn't react. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but by the time I looked back, he was gone. I tried to report it the next day, but the cops didn't take it seriously. No crime had been committed. No proof of trespassing, just a neighbor being weird. "You should probably talk to your landlord," the officer said. "See about better locks, maybe a security camera." I did. Lewin promised to look into it. He never did. A week passed with no sign of Ronald Blair. I started sleeping again. The factory job kept me busy. I even started hanging out with Evan from 2A on our nights off, grabbing a drink at this rundown dive bar called the Grail. Things felt normal for a while. It was a Friday night when everything changed. I came home late around 1:00 a.m. The building was dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. As I made my way up the stairwell, I noticed the door to 3B was wide open. No lights inside, no sound. I should have kept walking, should have locked myself in my apartment and gone to bed, but something gnawed at me. I reached the landing, peered inside. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no boxes, not even curtains on the windows. But on the floor in the center of the room lay a single object, an old battered cell phone. I picked it up. The screen was cracked, battery barely holding on. There was one saved video in the gallery. I opened it. The footage was dark and shaky. A shot of my bedroom window from the parking lot, my silhouette moving inside. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. Then a voice, low, growly. Soon I dropped the phone like it burned, ran to my apartment, bolted the door, called the cops. This time they believed me. They searched the building, but Ronald Blair was gone, disappeared like smoke. No one knew where he came from or where he went. Lewin swore he never signed a lease for him. There were no records, no application, no ID. Apartment 3B had supposedly been vacant for months. I moved out a week later, left over hill for good. I still don't sleep with my blinds open. I still check the parking lot every night, and sometimes at 2:13 a.m. I swear I hear a knock.